So when you look at the myth of the cave is actually based on this divided line. So here you see episteme, dianoia, pistis, and the cave here. I put all that up on the board the other day. I'd like to just go back briefly to illustrate what he's doing in book 9 for you, and then to take us into book 10. Drop the card on the floor. I don't know that's either. The other day I described this movement of the divided line up to see the good itself. That the whole point of the divided line was in order to see the good. It was a movement of the mind to greater and greater vistas, to greater and greater insight into what this thing is, the good, the beautiful, the true. It was, if you want to put it in a religious context, it was a way of seeing the divine, of seeing God himself. And because this is so cerebral, so abstract, his audience has a hard time grasping this concept, this idea. They're sluggish and sleepy. They're not concerned with the finding out about things. They're incapable of being able to get their mind around such an abstract concept. And so what does he do? He gives them a myth, a story, which is easier to grasp. He shows a movie, if you will. Because showing a video on YouTube is a lot easier than being able to describe something as abstract as this. So this movie, this video that he shows, is itself based upon the divided line. The movement from the back of the cave being chained to the earth all the way up to seeing the sun is the same movement from the world of the Akones to the world of the Adoi and then on to the good itself. It's the same image. It's just told in a more concrete way because you can latch on to things like caves and fires and puppets and that sort of business. Notice also in some of the elements in this cave, as I mentioned the other day, they have, all of them are charged with symbolic meaning, but they're all connected back to previous myths that he's told. So like in the cave, the prisoners chained to the earth, the links of the chain are like the ring that's found by Gyges. They are made of bronze or of iron, just like in the myth of the metals. The cave itself is the chaos, the chasm that he goes down into in the myth of Gyges. It's also the earth that the men are born out of in the myth of metals. When he goes up and he sees the fire, when he sees the little low wall and the fire, that's like this little low wall here. And he sees this fire that he sees, or sorry, little walls here. He sees this fire he sees is like the sun in our world. But then when he goes beyond the cave and sees the sun in the myth, that's actually seeing the good itself by extraction. So all of this has parallels, this myth has parallels throughout the rest of the work. Then he has that image of the philosopher needing to go back down into the cave to drag out other people. And that's where the myth gets a little bit risky because he's suggesting that anybody who's had an experience like this or seen an experience like this has to go back and tell other people about it. There's an obligation to do so. Even if that person's going to look like an idiot, even if that person's going to be ridiculed or laughed at or ignored, even if that person's going to be put to death, they have to go back and do it. They're compelled to go back and tell other people. Because part of the vision of the good is also a vision of compassion. Seeing other people, the suffering and the being trapped in their own little mind-forged manacles, as William Blake calls it. Yeah. Well, hopefully for some people it happens. Some people just get old and stupid. Is it like life? Yes, it's very much like life. And as a matter of fact, the whole birthing imagery of being born out of the cave, for instance, or being released from your chains is like having the umbilical cord cut. Or traveling up towards the good, towards the sky, towards the light, is like the image we use for people when they die. We say that they die and the soul goes up to heaven. It doesn't literally go up to heaven. It doesn't literally go up anywhere. But we use that metaphor because we're using this whole imagery. So yes, it is very much based upon an idea of being born and growing and maturing. Absolutely. And consequently has connections immediately to the Odyssey, too. Because the Odyssey is all about being born and images of being born over and over again. And he's made that connection before, where he talks about things like the Odyssean characters, the trickiness and polytropic thinking. So there's a connection to Odyssey even in this as well. The whole cave of the Cyclops is very much like this cave here. Yes.
So if people start inside the cave and change, do they ever make the choice to go out, or do they have to be brought up?
She suggests that they have to be brought up, that it is something that is done for them. They don't do it on their own. And it doesn't necessarily, he's very vague on this area of what it is that actually causes them to be brought up. Because I think he wants to leave it open to the possibility it doesn't have to be another human being. An event could cause this. I mean, what causes anybody to make the decision to grow up? It could be an experience of loss on the playing field. It could be a broken limb. It could be loss of a friend or a parent. It could be simply seeing something in a piece of literature or a movie that changes your worldview. It changes how you think. And I think that his vagary is intentional because he doesn't want to say you need a teacher. That's not. I don't think that's his point. What he does say later on is that the person is dragged, and here he says there really has to be a teacher because I think that initial response of I want to change my life happens to numerous people. But then there are numerous people who say I want to change my life, but it's too hard. I'm just going to go back to watching HGTV again. And they don't really want to make that effort to change. The effort to change has to be something where you have someone else literally dragging you along, kicking and screaming, falling asleep the entire time. You're wrenched up towards the light. That's why I think there are a lot of his imagery is being stillborn. There are a lot of people that are stillborn. They're born, but they're dead. They come into the world, but they're dead. And the rest of their quote-unquote life is kind of a dead life. Go ahead.
Is it possible that doesn't happen that they're not dragged?
No, not everyone gets eventually dragged out of the cave into this way. There are many people that live their entire life in the cave. And because it's so much effort to get out of it that they want to stay there comfortable. I think his suggestion is that the majority of people actually are in the cave. You only get a few. The road is narrow and seldom trod. And I think that he is intimating here that most people might have this experience of I want to change my life, or maybe there's something else out there, inkling of immortality or intimation of immortality. But the majority of people don't change their life. They actually go through the rest. They may graduate from high school. They may graduate from college. They may get a degree, but they're still dead. And in his estimation, their deadness is an attitude thing. It's more of a never bothering to ask the right questions and never bothering to be able to see what the good actually is. Only seeing the technical good.
Is that their fault?
Is it their fault? I don't know whether fault or blame can be ascribed to a person in this at all. I don't think fault is a question here. I think it's a question of pity. It's sad. That's why, for instance, I'll let the cat out of the bag. I don't at all buy into the idea that some colleagues of mine may have that there's a fault to a student for doing poorly. I don't think there's fault at all. I think it's sad. It's unfortunate. But fault, guilt or fault, I don't ascribe to a student because it's just like if they don't come out of the cave, that's unfortunate. It's really sad. But it's not a question of fault. It's not a question of guilt. Sometimes a person can be pinned under a rock and it's no fault of their own, but it is sad.
Are there any people who just like self-educating on themselves?
According to the myth, there is nobody who self-educates.
Well, there has to be one person, obviously, because like there's a time when there's nobody who
Plato is very aware of the fact that every metaphor breaks down at some point. It has flaws or errors in it, because not every metaphor can cover every aspect. If we were to look at this story in a rather literal way, it's impossible for it to have a beginning that doesn't include a human. At some point, somebody had to come down and pick them up, or you had to have somebody educated himself. That's true, but that's not the point of the myth. Yeah, it's not the point of the myth. What is the point of the myth is that we see it in later mythology. Somebody was pointing out that they see it in the Gospels or in the Acts of the Apostles. There's a story in the Acts of the Apostles, for instance, where Peter, I think, is in jail with another one of the disciples, and all of a sudden there's this earthquake, and the jail opens up, and Peter and the apostle walk out freely, led by an angel, walk right out of the prison, and are free men. That's the same story. It's a story of the cave told over again in the Acts of the Apostles. Same thing you could say is like what happens to Lazarus even in the New Testament.